That's CPD Show. My name is Chris Bright and I'll be your host today. And today I'm joined on the island by Eliana Whyte. Eliana is the principal of the International Bible Training Institute, a Pentecostal Bible college based in Burgess Hill in West Sussex. Originally from Italy, Eliana has spent 20 years in Italy, then 20 years in Spain, and almost 20 years now in the UK. Eliana is married to her husband, John. And Eliana, it's just great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be with you, really, to share this time together. Great.
Fantastic. And it would be great to hear a little bit about the International Bible Training Institute, what you're doing there, and all the work that you do. We'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, the college has been going for about 75 years. So it's a college that has had incredible impact outside of UK, in UK partly, but mainly in Europe and other parts of the world. It was really born out of the need of Europe. The principal or the founder of the college visited Europe from UK just after the Second World War and saw Europe in such devastation that God just inflamed his heart to do something for Europe. And the closest he could get to going there was to actually train people, but from countries, from other countries, to come here, spend time here, and then send them back. So the college has really been built around the model of training people from different nations. So not necessarily send missionaries, but actually take people, train them, prepare them, and send them back. So it's very apostolic, very mission oriented. It's a mission college, it's a faith college. It's really maintained that ethos of focusing on the nation of Europe, and then it went on to other parts of the world. Continues to be that the primary goal, and very much on a boot camp kind of a style. Really come close to students. We are really a family, and we run it as a Jesus with his disciples kind of model, and come along student and respect in some ways, really respect where they're coming from. We're not trying to acculturize them. We're not trying to change their culture. We actually respect where they're coming from and help them to prepare, to be complete in that preparation, and then go back. So that is quite an intense work, because we are determined not to bring them onto our culture, but to create a culture here that transcends even the different national culture. So that's what we do. We continue to send people back to their places, which is very exciting.
Well, it's wonderful to hear all the work that you're doing, and vital works to be able to train missionaries for the nations. And thank you so much for all the work that you do on that. Well, we're going to talk about 3 resources that you've brought with you today. But of course, I say this every podcast that I do. This is not a desert island. This is a dessert island. And I think a dessert island is much better than a desert island. So we're going to talk about your favorite dessert first. So what's your favorite dessert?
Okay, it's Italian, of course. I'm originally from Italy. So my favorite dessert is called cassata. So that's Cassata. It's originally from Sicily. But you can find it, well, it's quite famous in all of Italy. The dessert is a mixture, if I can describe, it's a mixture between a frangipane tart and a ricotta New York cheesecake covered with marzipan, like a marzipan feast kind of thing.
Wow.
It's a very, very moist inside, but it's got this ricotta cheese, which is very light and fresh. It's hard to describe it, but I would say that closest is between a frangipane tart and a New York cheesecake. anything almonds. I like anything almonds. So it's an almond feast.
An almond feast, that does sound rather good. And I'm always a fan of an Italian dessert. In fact, my favorite dessert is the Italian classic tiramisu.
Tiramisu.
So I'm all on board with Italian desserts. So kind of when's the perfect time to have this? A lot of desserts that we've had people on the podcast talk about is that, you know, they tend to be the kind of Sunday dinner desserts kind of thing. And but when would you have a cassata? When's the perfect time for it?
Well, personally, I would have it any time, of course. That's the truth. But I would say probably it's quite rich. End of meal may not appeal, but a mid-morning, go out for a coffee with a friend, great, with a coffee, a cappuccino and a cassata, or a merenda, which is an afternoon. You know, we have a big gap between lunch and supper. We eat so late there. So a mid-afternoon, people would go out maybe for a coffee with their friends, and about 5:30 or 6, you would have a cassata. Yeah, it's you would want it on its own. I think at the end of a meal is quite rich. It's a bit like a rich cheesecake. You know, if you've had a big meal, you wouldn't want that. But yeah, but as I said, I would have it anytime, any place.
You're certainly selling the Italian lifestyle to me. I think I love this. You know, go out for coffee, have a cassata. I would just, yeah, that sounds great to me.
No, I know.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great dessert. That's a cassata. We're going to move on to your first resource now. What's the first one you brought with you?
Okay, I brought Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Yeah, boundaries. So important.
Yeah, I've heard of this book. I've not read it. I've heard of Henry Cloud before, and I think I've seen some of his videos online. Tell me about the book. What's the kind of the premise of the book, and what have you learned from it?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, the whole book defines a boundary as an area of ownership, but equally an area of responsibility. So it just opens up this concept, which is a very simple concept, but in the book is very well explained and just, yeah, unpack. The writer is able to just show you the importance to really see life through boundaries and knowing what we own and equally what we are responsible for. I suppose for me, a little bit of the background to the book, to why the book was so impacted me. I was brought up in a very large Italian family. We are 6 children, and in my family, basically, we lived in a not so small house, but relatively small for 8 people. And in my house, there was never space for anything. I shared, we were 4 girls and 2 boys, so I shared a room, my bedroom, with 3 other sisters, and like there was no space for anything. In the wardrobe, there is no space. When you're traveling in the car, there's no space. And I went through this process of life really very, very close in. And yet, my parents managed to really establish boundaries in our own identity and uniqueness, which was really, my parents were in ministry. They dedicated a lot of time also to us as a family. When I read the book, it kind of, it opened me to the realization of how important it is to really know where we begin and where we end. In a way, it was a confirmation of the importance of self-awareness, to be self-aware in my relationship, in my work, where I begin and where I end. What do I own and what am I responsible for? So the book, opens up boundaries between us and God. We may not think there are there should be boundaries between us and God, but there are. We need to realize what we own and what God owns. Equally, what God is responsible for and what we are responsible for. If we're not clear on that, we will end up having cross boundaries in between even our relationship with God. And then it goes on to establish very strongly the importance of boundaries between even me and myself. What are the expectations? What are the responsibility towards others? What do I own? Do I own others? Because sometimes we think people, we own people. We can do whatever we want with people, but that comes from first defining boundaries with ourselves and then boundaries with others consequently, which then brings us to the importance of establishing in our workplaces, in our family, in our relationship, in our ministry. I have found that when I was reading the book, it just did something to me. It's something that I knew, something that probably I'd been taught in, but never really defined it. And it was like the light went on and realized this is something I wanted to teach. So I teach it in the Bible college, and I've seen real difference in people's life when they realize who they are by understanding where they finish. We are not everything. We have a beginning and we have boundaries around who we are. One thing that it did to me, I just want to say out of the book, it came the realization that even in our identity, we have boundaries around our identities. And I'll explain it in a minute. And I started to live by that. And I've seen incredible progress in my relationship with God, in my relationship with myself and with others, in realizing who I am in any given relationship. So who are we? We are in our identity to people. We are not anybody without people. So I am a daughter because there is parents. I am a wife because there is a husband. I am a pastor because there is a congregation. I am, etc., etc. I'm a mother if there is a child. I'm a sister if there are sisters. And realizing that our identity, there is a boundary around a relationship, it really freed me to be who I need to be in that particular relationship. So with my sisters, I'm not their pastor, I'm not their leader, I'm their sister. With my husband, I'm not the principal, I'm his wife. And so boundaries around who we are, because sometimes we may think we are everything. We are everything and we need to be, and we speak consequently as if we are something that we are not. And possibly most of our problem, from what my assessment has been, most of our problem rise or are born out of stepping out of actually the boundaries of our identity. So a very interesting book can be very practical, but at the same time very profound in shifting something in ourselves.
It does really sound fascinating and really vital for everyone to wrestle with that concept of what are your boundaries around who you are. I wonder, for ministers listening to this, how could they put good boundaries in place as a minister, as a pastor of a church, maybe? What would you recommend? Well, what would you reckon this book would recommend?
As someone who has pastored a church myself with my husband in Spain, the church planted there, and now at the school, the importance of really see ourselves who we are in people's life and what we are not. Sometimes there is such a confusion about trying to be everything to everybody when we are not. Even sometimes, may I say, sometimes take the place of God in terms of, we feel we can even have that burden. We feel so burdened about having to be something that not even God is asking us to be. So I think it can be liberating in knowing where that we don't own the church. Jesus owned the church because he paid a price for it, which we will never pay. So to establish that we are not, I had to do it so many years ago, establish that we are not people saviors and we are not people redeemers. We are people's leaders, pastors, we disciplers, teachers. We can point. I'm tired to say how many times I say we are signposts. We're signposts. Now, signposts are vitally important and they have authority, because when you see a sign, you better obey what the sign says. But we are pointing, but there can be so much pressure about being more than we are even called to be. So boundary in that sense, it can be, so the book can be so important for leaders, but equally understand what my responsibility is, because if I have a responsibility, then it's like if you look at a house, you look at the boundary of your property, defines ownership, but then it defines responsibility, because you're responsible for that. And if you are not responsible, somebody can come and say, hey, your children are being abused. You're not being responsible in your area. So equally, it can be a wake-up call to, am I fulfilling my responsibility fully for what I have been given, I've been entrusted? It's not always to our advantage. Sometimes we also have to have a good checkup and say, am I taking my responsibility as a leader and pastor of the church? Am I taking that responsibility that goes beyond what it may be a job description? You know what I mean? It's a heart responsibility, rather a job. So both ways it works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is absolutely vital for church leaders and pastors to really think through, and I think to read this book would be so helpful, because I think it's, the temptation if you're a minister is you want to be everything to the people that you're leading, and that sometimes means you want to be so like you said, that analogy of the house has a boundary, the property has a boundary, and actually the boundary of the role of minister and pastor, it can be very easy for ministers to go beyond the bounds of that, because they want to help so much. Recognizing that actually to be faithful in what you're called to do,
yes,
and to take responsibility in that. And so having boundaries is not an abdication of responsibility. In fact, it's a taking up of responsibility.
It's a taking up, but it helps you really to define it. And then, I love that passage where it says, one of David's men that defended the field. One field, it's like, maybe there were many others, but he took that field and said, this is my responsibility. I'm not trying to be everything. I'm not trying to be big. This is not about being big. This is about fulfilling. It's like if you think about families, some have 5 children, some have a smaller house. It's about what you have and being responsible for what you have. It's never been about quantity. It's never been about being bigger and going bigger and bigger, or extending. It's about responsibility. Then if it's a big house, if it's a big family, if it's a big ministry, praise God, that's the Bible says that's given according to the measure of faith, to the measure of capacity, to the gifting, the talent, etc., etc. But yeah, it's the feeling of really sense of feeling liberated by what I own and what I'm responsible for, equally important. I know the emphasis sometimes is I own this is mine, this is our ministry, but I'll tell you something, to every ownership there's a big responsibility, so equally important.
Brilliant. Well, that's Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Should we move on to the second resource?
Yeah. The second one I've chosen is Perspectives on the World Christian Movement by Ralph Winter. Now, this is not the classic book. It's a tome. A tome? Is that as you said? Yeah, it's a big beast. It's not written by Ralph Winter, it's edited by him, because it's a compilation of about 170 articles or readings of mission scholars and practitioners across several generations and across the world. It's I would define it as an encyclopedia of mission. So if you're going on mission, if you've got a mission call, a mission heart, it's a volume that will stay with you. It's something that you can refer back to. You can find a knowledge, historical, biblical, historical, cultural, and strategic dimension of world evangelization. It's just something to have in your library, even as a church leader, but just a comprehension of the development of the Pentecostal movement in mission. So yeah, I can't recommend it enough. I know it's not the reading you want to do in your bed at night. It's quite intense at times, but it's to be read by articles. It's to be picked when you need it, and really let that truth or let that experience just minister to you and teach you. And the reason probably why I've chosen that book, can I continue, Chris? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I'll give you the reason why I chose it. Of course, my husband and I came to study at the college where I lead now. Actually the 22nd of this month, it'll be 40 years ago. I came in 1984. I was only 18. And then met my husband here, and we went on mission with the Assemblies of God to Spain, and we were there for about 20 years. And of course, mission is our heart. We continue to be missionary with the Assemblies of God, even though we are in UK, because of the work that we do. And mission is our heart. Mission is our that sense of going, that sense of reaching. Mission as understood as reaching out and stretching out of your place, of your comfort zone, but even of your own culture. There is that calling. The mission calling is stepping out of yourself, and the reason why I chose it, because when I read it years ago, there were two particular areas that really impacted me, and that's what I wanted to share about. One was the essence of contextualization, understanding the importance to contextualize, but now we're not just saying the gospel in Spain, how to contextualize, but the principle of contextualization, which is something that has to happen in our lives day by day. We need to contextualize the gospel every day. In our workplace, we need to contextualize, in our relationships, in our changing society, in our churches, in our generational differences between one generation and the other. You contextualize. So it's not just a topic for missionaries or for mission agency. It's actually following what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9, become all things to all men, just to save few by whichever way I can. And the experience of Paul of having to do this for the sake of gaining few. He was so many things. We're not going to list everything that Paul was, but he was so many things, and he could have been many things, but he had learned that to reach people, he had to let go of some of the things that he were, and he had to become. So it's about becoming. It's a bit like, from there, the book just, although not in a direct, I couldn't quote a phrase and say, this is what the book says, but the actual book is steeped in incarnation. It's like the need to understand the concept of incarnation, to that concept of becoming. Partly is possibly is also the reason why the book appeals so much to me, and it did me so much good, is because myself, I come from the experience of 3 nations. I have lived in my own culture, then I have had to go to, well, no, I've had to go, but I went to Spain and I had to contextualize myself. And then I came to UK. Well, I did it as a student. I had to start to incarnate something. And incarnation is that side of it's that concept or that step of leaving something behind. You know, Jesus left something behind. He had to be born. He had to he had to be reborn into another culture. It wasn't heaven. Now, steps that I've had to learn personally in changing nation is a leaving behind. But I believe that the book can really be helpful in understanding how many people have left. In order to do what they did, they had to leave something behind. Leave and cleave. You know, we cannot be without leaving. And you know, that's so true. When you change culture, you've got to leave your culture behind, not because you leave it in values, but you've got to disrobe yourself from certain things, and the humility that comes with it, and the loss of rights. I tell you something, learning a language and being in another country really teaches you how to incarnate, how to contextualize. And there is a very humble journey when you go to another nation. You cease to be. It doesn't matter. You know, I remember for years conversation, like people were having conversation and I could not say anything like, oh, in my country, there is no, what you say, it's like you're a child again. I remember for years, both in UK and in Spain, when people were talking, I didn't know what they were talking about. You go to a place where you are a child again. You have to relearn everything. So it's a very humble road, and that speaks to me about if we want to contextualize, we cannot go into the world with arrogance or with oh, we know who we are. No, it's a very, Jesus came and humbled himself. So to incarnate and contextualize, there is a really humble journey, and you leave your rights behind. And that's how we are going to reach the world, not by rights, not by who we are, but really humbly giving our lives and relearning. I found that learning two languages, learning two culture, is just starting from scratch. So contextualize, it's really this emptying yourself. So I think the book, not in the words that I've said it, but the book actually, that's one of the main messages of the need that we have to contextualize.
I think there's this book sounds like it's perfect for, obviously, for people who are wanting to be missionaries and go to another country, but I think for anyone who is involved in any kind of, you know, the Missio Dei, the mission of God, you know, a local minister, you know, that work of contextualization is for everyone. As soon as we leave the doors of the church, we are contextualized. Even within the bounds of the church, we have to contextualize it, because there are people that come from all different backgrounds and places, and like you said, it's having to incarnate into the environment where we are, to be able to reach the people and to speak their language, and to speak the timeless truth in a new way. So I think this sounds like it's going to be absolutely vital for any minister, anyone involved in mission, anyone who wants to reach wherever they're sent to
have it in the library. It's something that they can refer to, and that is just a glimpse. That's what I gather, but there's so much in that. And I had actually drawn 2 points. The second point that really impacted me by reading the book was the you know, Matthew 9:35-38. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And it was just again, in so many ways, the book does cover it, but it doesn't. This is what I've drawn, and that's the truth, isn't it? We read a book, and it's not about even what it's written in the book, but isn't that what God does? From a seed that you read, something happens in your life, and then the book becomes different for you than for me, because that's how God works. One of the areas that really sparked in my life was exactly understanding the understanding that the harvest is plentiful. And when you read that chapter, it says that Jesus, actually, the chapter it's full of Jesus doing all sorts of miracle, and he healed this and he did that and that. And then it says, and he went from every town, and in every town he taught in the synagogue, and then he healed all the sick. And then at the end of that, you can imagine this day, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then this finish this itinerary, and then the chapter concludes as the harvest is plentiful. I can just imagine Jesus looking at all this and saying, "Oh, there's so much to do. The harvest is plentiful. That's not the issue, but the laborers are few." Well, imagine he had been doing this on his own almost. So I could do with a team here. But for me, that point. What it does is through this book, I was really able to see that the harvest is really plentiful. I don't think I've ever thought about it until I read it, to really realize that this is not about asking God to, Lord, move, Lord, move. No, the harvest is ready. The harvest is plentiful. But I was able to identify the weakness, and the weakness is the laborers are few. That is really the weakness. And I started to focus my life on it. So what was the focus? Train laborers. I think that's the issue. When we understand, maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing. The focus here is about training people. The focus here is about prepare laborers, because the harvest is plentiful. I think that, to me, it was a realization that it really defined where I was going to give my life. That was the essence. Yeah, again, the book sparked that. I thank God for that. And I believe it's true. I believe it's so true.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's a message that it works for churches, it works for missionaries, it works, you know, for anyone who is a follower of Jesus. You know, our role is to be a laborer. Is to be someone who is we're all sent ones into the world that we're and whether, you know, that's we're all called to be laborers, but we're all called to sort of prepare laborers as well. So the job of ministry, that job of ministry is to equip the saints for works of service.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, this book is, I think, is going to be a great resource, you know, when we're looking at that notion of incarnation and contextualization, but also lighting that fire to prepare laborers because, like you said, that the harvest is plentiful. Fantastic. That's the perspective on world missions movement, which is edited by Ralph Winter. Should we go on to your final resource? What's the final one that you've brought with you?
Yeah, the last one is The Courage to Teach by Parker J. Palmer.
Brilliant. Well, let's dive into that one. Yeah.
The essence of the book, I mean, he's a fantastic teacher. He confesses to faith, but the book is not focused on just Christian teaching. He's a teacher of teachers. He has also got The Courage to Lead as a side resource. But the book basically it's built around the truth that good teaching can never be reduced to techniques. And so, you know, he defines good teaching as coming from the identity and the integrity of the teacher, which will automatically enable live encounters. So he defends and he advocates for live encounters between teacher, student, and subject. So this power encounter between three elements. One is the teacher, because of his identity, who is that gifting, the love for teaching, and the integrity of his own life. So again, a little bit the incarnation of what he says. So not just words, but being. And the students as the receiving, the receptors of that, and the matter that you teach, why you teach what you teach. So teaching truth, teaching passion, not just teaching for repetition or technique, but really encounter a unity between these three elements. My background, I studied pedagogy, which is the science of teaching children. Of course, that's my field. But over the years, what this book did, among other books, other resources, but it's an excellent resource, this one, is really to bring back a little bit the art of teaching rather than just preaching. Why am I saying that? Because the Bible, ultimately, the mandate is to go and make disciples. That is the mandate. And making disciples means teaching. So that is really, for me, the key call of every believer. And from that kind of equation, we are all called to teach, because if we really see discipleship as teaching, it's an applied process. It's not just giving a message, but discipleship is shaping, developing. It's a very close experience of modeling. So watching and seeing the person receive the teaching, but then actually put it into practice. So it's a development of the life. So I'm, as a teacher myself, I see the importance of rediscovering teaching, not in the classical, what the first thing that comes to mind, the profound theology teaching, but the practice of teaching, how we share the gospel, what is our vision? Is it to see people saved or see people actually shaped? I suppose for me, over the years, the challenge has been, watching the educational system slowly changing, whereas a few decades ago, we were still watching pedagogy at work. So you had this, when I say pedagogy, I mean the art that centers on dependent learners. So the learner depends on the teacher. If we look back a few decades and then we go back in history, you could see the place of the teacher in the life of the student. So this was not just a textbook, this was not just information, but there was the embodiment, and within the relationship, development takes place. Because if you take away the relationship away, you are left with a passage of information. Whereas the relationship brings the development of the individual in learning. So you're not just developing knowledge, but you're developing the individual through that relationship. And so pedagogy defends more the presence of the teacher. And I believe the Bible is on the model of pedagogy. But in the last few decades, andragogy, which is now, andragogy is another science, we can say, which empowers self-directed adult learning. And today's education system is much based on andragogy, which is the learning by myself, through resources, through self-assessment. The whole educational system today, university, etc., and many models of teaching is based now on adult learning. Now, I'm not against adult learning, because even the Bible says that you get to a place, and I think per John, it says, nobody will teach you, the Holy Spirit will teach you. So I'm not saying that, we should keep people in a dependent form, but I do believe that we are starting to see the signs of taking away the figure of a teacher from life of people. And even, may I say, Chris, at the spiritual level, at the church level, the place the leaders and teachers had before, not because we need to be important, but that human shaping, that relationship shaping, that modeling shaping is slowly disappearing. And so in the last few years, I've become a bit of not an advocate, but I really stress pedagogy and the Bible, because the model, it's there to stay. We cannot learn on our own. We can only learn in relationship with Christ, with God. And so for me, the book opens really for those who are interested in this and really want to go further into what teaching is, what it is that we are aiming at, it really gives you, it gives you an insight into the power encounter between teacher, subject, and student. I cannot say how important it is. Even in the new generations today, I can see very quickly the signs of young people when they are learning by themselves. They're learning by themselves. That relationship with teacher is disappearing. The relationship with the authority, the significant figures is slowly being removed by parents, by teacher, and consequently by church leaders. Those significant figures, their places are starting to be shifted in people's lives. So I would like to really redeem pedagogy and the Bible in Christian circles and say, yes, we are not talking about being all children, but if you think pedagogy says that 86% of what we learn it before we are 5 years old. So my calculation is this: if 85% of what we learn it before we are 5, because after 5 years old, you learn content, but before you're 5, you learn structure of life. You learn to think, you learn to walk, you learn to cognitively comprehend volumes, weight, your life. It's not, in fact, we're all brilliant students. I said to the student, when you think you're not good, you're brilliant, because before you were 5, you've learned most of what you will ever learn. But equally, I believe that if we do most of our learning before we are 5, imagine maybe we need to rediscover how children learn. How did we learn all that stuff? And how did we learn it? We learned it by mimicking, by copying, by watching, and in relationship, nurture. So I cannot advocate. I could talk forever, Chris. I could talk forever, but that's not the point. The point is.
Yeah, what I'd love to find out is, what could church leaders, church ministers do to start that process of moving away from andragogy, if I said that correctly, and moving towards pedagogy, so that actually how do church leaders embrace that process more and get into so it's a much more of a lived teaching rather than just a taught from a distance teaching. What could church leaders do to start moving towards that?
One of the first thing of pedagogy is actually that modeling, isn't it? So it's providing a model, it's providing an example, and it's providing a practical. Pedagogy is much more practical on copying or mimicking a practice. So for a start, I think in the church we could rediscover the practical ministry, the creative ministry, in the sense of not so much theoretical teaching, but equally bring in that really hands-on. So don't teach somebody to go and evangelize, bring them with you. Don't teach them about going on mission, take them with you. It's given them a given opportunity to be with their teachers and to say, let's not, so much of even church life, and I'm talking general, I'm not being selective, but so much is around a theory of being told to do what to do, go and do it. And maybe in some ways it's that breaking down that theoretical side, even if it's gospel, even if it's the Bible study, even if it's concept, biblical concept and theology, deep theology, but it's taken and say, hey, not only learn it through theory, but let's do it. And also if you start to look into personal learning style, learning style, we know that everybody has got learning style. Even the church follows a little bit secular world, where we are accommodating a lot for the intellectual learners, aren't we? Because the intellectual learners study well in a classroom, in the classic classroom. But we have got many other, the intuitive, the inventors, the implementers. There are other learning styles that don't necessarily learn so much through the theory. They really need to be engaged. And I've always wondered if we miss opportunity with people because we are not teaching in the style that they best learn. So yeah, there is work to do. But we can become more practical, give opportunity, and also teachers and leaders not being afraid of giving opportunity where people are with you, and go through experiences, first time experiences with you. It's good. It brings you know how it is when you go on a trip together with a lead. I mean, it breaks down so much of the cosmetics of things, and it goes to the real. You've got time. They see you in your vulnerability. They see you in your natural self, but they equally see passion, and they see what you're consumed by. So yeah.
Fantastic. I think there's so much. I'm going to have to go away and have a really good think about that. That's really got my ideas going. And I think for any minister listening to this, I think really diving into that, what do we really mean by discipleship and teaching, and how do we move it from just the kind of classroom thing, which is not in itself bad and necessary, but how do you put that into the practical, into the lived, into the exampled as well? That's a really fantastic thought. I'm probably gonna spend the rest of the day thinking about that now. So brilliant. Well, Eliana, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed it. The three resources are Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, Perspectives on World Christian Movement by Ralph Winter, who's edited that, and then the final is The Courage to Teach by Parker J. Palmer. And I think all of those three things would certainly go very well with a cassata, maybe a nice coffee, maybe in a sort of a cafe in Rome somewhere.
Absolutely, anytime.
That sounds really good. Well, brilliant. Thank you so much, Eliana, for taking the time, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. And so thank you so much for taking the time. And
thank you for the opportunity and the privilege. Bless you.